Welcome back to Sika Strength. Welcome back to Sika Stan. Today's video is a small bit of admin. So for the last 3 or 4 months, you've seen me putting up training vlogs. Every training vlog that goes up, there's always a lot of questions and comments that come in. We do our very best to get around to everyone. But today, we're going to answer around 40 of your questions that have been popping up in training vlogs about my training and about how I'm getting on with it. So first question is from Theo. And he says, you've probably mentioned this before, so sorry if you did, but what are you training for? Jiu-jitsu, squats and a 5k, what's the end point of that? Also interesting that if you choose to run so late in the day, I get the idea of spacing out your two sessions, but if you had another session early the next morning, I would definitely not be leaving the running till so late at night. Okay, so 2 things here. First thing is I'm training for yet another attempt to run a sub 5 minute mile and squat over 500 pounds in the same day. For those of you who've been following the channel for a while, you would have seen one of these attempts happen 2 years ago and one of these attempts happened 3 years ago. So it's something I've had a rattle off before. It's an incredibly hard thing to train for. There's a reason only 3 other people have ever done it. So yeah, I'm planning to do it hopefully around August. I think there's some more questions popping up about this later on. Now, the second part of this question is important. Why do you do the runs so late in the evening? And there's a couple of things here. So the first thing is purely spacing out the run, getting it a bit further away from the other training sessions. Now, the reason for this obviously is I want to recover a small bit, but also I'm in a large calorie deficit at the moment. So all of my carbs, or the only carbs I have every day, are just stacked around training. So pre and post training are the only time I'll have carbs. So it's just a little bit easier for me to stack it a small bit further away rather than having a large bolus of carbohydrate around a kind of 2.5 hour window. Then I'll just have small amount of carbs before and after the morning session, then a small amount of carbs before and after the evening session, and it just makes things a bit easier. Now, the second aspect of this is purely just down to a personal scheduling thing. So obviously we're running Sika Strength. I have a lot of other stuff to do and just stay on top of every evening as well. So a lot of other hobbies, a lot of other responsibilities to do. So a lot of time, by the time I get around to running, like I did a half marathon on Monday. I did that at 11 p.m. at night. And was going late into the night with that run. So it's just a scheduling thing. I tend to be very much a nighttime person rather than a morning person. So it's just a bit easier. To be honest, if jiu-jitsu class wasn't at 8 a.m, there's absolutely no way I would be training in the morning. Next question is from John Candler. So it says, what's your warm-up before the 5k? Is it just go for it and try and go negative splits? Or do you do 1 mile easy and then go? So to be honest, this depends. If I'm going for a kind of 5k PB time, I'll definitely do a warm-up. So what that usually looks like is just starting with a 1k very, very slow. So like 7 minute per kilometer pace, just really slowly trying to bring my heart rate up, getting my core body temperature up. And then I'll do just kind of pick a 50-meter section of the trail or the track, and I'll just do some dynamic stretching and some ballistic stretching there. So some kind of heel flicks, some high knees, very, very standard field sports warm-up stuff. To be honest, for running, unless I'm particularly sore or tight in an area, I don't really focus on that too much as the warm-up goes on. Obviously, for interval sessions, for 400-meter repeats, 800-meter repeats, there is a bit more warming up going on because the stride demands more from me. So in that case, I tend to get my ankles, my Achilles, and my calves much warmer. I tend to focus on that a lot more. So a bit of like stage 1 and stage 2 plyometrics. And the second thing I do is just work on hip extension. So my hip flexors tend to be quite tight, so I lose a bit of my stride there, and it actually messes up my back and fatigues my back quite a lot. I'll get an anterior pelvic tilt because my ass kind of sticks out the back and my quad or my legs don't fully extend back behind me. So they're the things I focus on, but not for a 5k warm up. Most of the time, if it's 5k in training, I'll put my shoes on and start running. Next question is from Tiernan. And Tiernan, this question is echoed by many, many people. It says, just wondering why you don't do longer runs like 10Ks and 20Ks to build up aerobic fitness, or do you? And then down again, we see some other people commenting on this. So firstly is I do longer runs. I do like 5Ks, 8Ks, and sometimes 10Ks. As you've heard me say earlier on in the video, I did a half marathon on Monday. To be honest, that was just purely because I was talking shit in the group chat and said I could run a half marathon without any training. So why don't I do longer runs? The first thing is this challenge is very, very specific in its training. I don't think that longer runs are necessarily a bad idea, but when you look at the training demands, I have to be able to run a 3-minute kilometer for 1.6 kilometers. So the longer runs, like in the half marathon, take for example, during that half marathon, my heart rate was around 105 beats per minute. The training effect from it, to be honest, if I'm looking back on that and being anyway objective about it, the training effect is virtually zero. It's a long walk. It was very, like, the pace wasn't good. The pace was by no means a competitive pace. But those sessions I get so very little from. When you consider the effect of like lactic threshold training, any of the interval sessions, even any of the 5Ks and 2K repeat sessions, they are massive in terms of bang for your buck for training. The longer stuff tends to have a lot of wear on the joints, a lot of wear on like small little niggly stuff, and I don't really get any aerobic effect from it. Now, I definitely have to keep it in there. I definitely have to be doing a long run at least once per week, but this idea of accumulating a massive amount of volume when we're now probably 4 months out or 5 months out from the competition date or the end line for this just isn't that valuable. When we see a lot of the kind of traditional mile training, there's a lot of volume in there. But the first thing is none of those people are 100 kilos when they're doing that. So the wear and tear is far less. And none of those people are squatting over 200 kilos while they're doing that. So they're not doing multiple squat sessions per week. And the demands are just different. And the idea of this and the idea of equating this style of training to the style of training you'll see a 1600 meter runner doing would be the equivalent of me doing a full powerlifting program for the squat. Obviously, the squat program is going to be altered slightly. Obviously, there has to be accommodations made for that. You can't simply make a hybrid training program by slapping a running training on top of a powerlifting program or a running program on top of a weightlifting program. There has to be accommodations made, and the longer distance stuff is one of the main accommodations. Edward Edmonds asks, did I hear that right? 15 grams of creatine. Joseph asked it, a load of other people asked it, and yes, you did definitely hear it right. So a lot of the time our kind of thoughts and our views on creatine are slightly skewed. I think definitely people's views on the effectiveness of creatine or what a creatine even does for you is massively skewed. As I mentioned earlier, the kind of diet protocols at the moment are very much to manipulate my body weight downwards. So when I'm using creatine in a training session, it's very much with the focus of replenishing ATP easier and faster. So using creatine as that kind of energy source as I'm training. Creatine is not being used here to influence power outputs or to influence muscle size or mass in any way. It's basically just being used as a substrate. So don't necessarily echo my uses of creatine in any way. If you're a power athlete, a rugby player, a sprinter or something along those lines, and you're using creatine, trying to increase that kind of natural pool of creatine that you have available to you, I don't think 15 grams of creatine is that useful to you. But if you're using it as that kind of energy source during training sessions, as that kind of immediate access or faster access to ATP, it certainly is very, very useful. Now, people's views on creatine are all over the place. I am not a dietitian and I am not somebody to be listening to on this kind of stuff, but definitely high boluses of creatine around training help massively. You'll see this echoed by a massive amount of athletes out there. There's multiple misperceptions out there about creatine, like 5 grams a day versus 3 grams a day, loading phases versus plateaus, the idea of cycling off creatine, all these crazy views on it. Make your own decisions, do your own research. By no means do you need to be taking 15 grams of creatine every day, but I take it as I'm training in my intra workouts and it helps me a lot. Okay, Kev asks, will you sleep okay after that run? Probably yes. So in many cases, I'm running late at night. For my entire life of training, I have trained late into the evening. So when I started playing proper rugby, full pitch rugby, I was probably 12 or 13. Those sessions start at 7 p.m. They end at 9 or 9:30 p.m. That's how I trained 3 or 4 times a week for my entire adolescence. Then if I was going to the gym on the days I wasn't on the pitch, I was doing the same thing, usually 7 p.m., 8 p.m. in the evening. Those sessions the whole way through after I stopped playing ball and after I went into weightlifting or when I was doing CrossFit, it was always later in the evening sessions. Now, that's with training sessions, and running sessions tends to be A-okay. The times those sessions directly affect my sleep is with jiu-jitsu sessions, and particularly jiu-jitsu sessions where there's hard rolling. So in those cases, obviously you get these massive spikes in heart rate, much, much higher than you get, to be honest, in most of your other training sessions. There's exceptions to this, obviously, if you're doing absolute PR work or you're doing absolute race pace intensity training, your heart rate will spike very, very highly. But there's something about another man choking you, not to death, nobody's going to war here, but choking you until you tap out or putting you in very, very disadvantageous positions until you tap out, get your heart rate incredibly high, get your stress level incredibly high, and yeah, sleeping at night after that is difficult. At the moment, I'm only doing 1 or 2 evening sessions per week. Most of the time, it's only 1 evening session a week, and it really doesn't affect me. It's always either on a Monday or a Friday evening, and I just make sure I'm not going to be massively taxed the next morning. So on a Monday evening, even if my sleep isn't great, I train at 8 a.m. the next morning. It's a lighter jiu-jitsu session. It works perfectly. If it's a Friday, then I'm not going to be training hard on a Saturday morning. So it's always just kind of accounting for that. But in terms of lifting weights or squatting particularly, or running, though that doesn't really affect my sleep at all, to be honest. On Monday, I think I got into bed at 1:45 in the morning, and I'd say I was asleep at probably 1:55, so it really doesn't negatively affect me all that much. Danun Teje says, love to see it. Already a good bit of way to the goal, it seems. How many months have you left until you're going to go for it? I think I remember from one of the shit talks, you have quite some time left, but I can't remember what the planning was like. So the rough outline of the plan at the moment is to go for it in August. So probably mid to late August. We're obviously at the Olympics in late July, early August. So I'll still be able to train and stuff over there. But when I get home, I plan to do my kind of last 3 weeks of that peak and then into a week of taper. And that should be a fairly solid timeline. Couple of reasons I chose August for the kind of end date. The first thing is that Ireland rains every single day, and hopefully during the summer it will just be a bit warmer when it's raining. So doing the running sessions, we don't have access to an indoor running track where we are in Ireland. If I was still living near UL, it would be absolutely great. But with the situation we're in now, all running is outdoors, and 99% of running is outdoor on a kind of footpath or something along those lines. So it's constantly raining. The evenings are very short here during the winter. So obviously I started this training block in January, but my hope is that as those sessions get a bit harder and as I may need more help in terms of just general not getting rained on every day, that the June, July and August of the training block will kind of facilitate that a bit easier. The evenings will go from it being fully dark at around 4:30 p.m. to it being fully dark at 11:30 p.m. at night. And that just makes things an awful lot easier, particularly in those interval sessions. Interval sessions in the dark are just an absolute disaster. Seeing where your distance markers are, all of that, having timers on the ground or whatever it is, when it's brighter, it's just so much easier to do that. And so that's why August was the end date. The other thing, obviously, is that these training blocks have to be big. I failed at this thing twice before, and both of those times it was like a 6-month training block, a solid 6-month training block. In this case, it's much, much closer to kind of 8 months. And depending if you consider some of the Kiss Me Arse training I did in December, it's a 9-month training block. Tewaz Tim says, why do you use WD-40 on your belt prongs? So in one of the training vlogs, you will have seen me putting WD-40 on the little prong that goes through the hole in the belt when I'm squatting. So that belt I bought at the end of the last cycle. It's just a powerlifting belt. I cannot remember the brand, but it's great. It's just a normal, standard, big, thick leather powerlifting belt, single prong. Now, because it hasn't been used in a year and a half, everything is incredibly stiff. The leather is incredibly stiff. And you would have seen in one of the max out sessions, maybe it was the 5RM session, trying to get the belt off was impossible. My abs and intercostals went completely into cramp, and I just had to stay there with the belt on for a few minutes until that cramp stopped, and then get a screwdriver into the hole and kind of lever my belt open with that screwdriver. WD-40 was just to make that whole process a bit easier, and WD-40 fixes everything. Gymaniac says, after watching the first several reps, I honestly did not think you would hit 5. Very impressive and motivating. This is something that came up from that 5RM test I did a few weeks ago, and it came up so many times. So people messaging me, people in the comments, this is incredible, crazy how much of a grind this was. This is something we have to get across to people on a daily basis when they're training. Maybe they're athletes of ours, maybe they're on the training programs, maybe they're using the programs that are on the app. And this is something we come up against all the time. A true 5RM, 3RM, 2RM, 1RM, 10RM, whatever it is, means there is no more reps left there. It doesn't mean that it's 5 and maybe I could do 6 or 7. It doesn't mean that it's 5 reps and maybe I could add 5 kilos. And it certainly doesn't mean that it's, oh, I did 140 but it felt good, so my 5RM's probably 150. When you're doing rep max testing, you are doing the amount of reps at its absolute maximum. Your last squat should not look like the first squat when you're doing a rep max test. It's great if it does. It's great if that's your squat and your squat is so technically perfect that you just simply stop moving when you get to a heavy enough weight. You'll see many Olympic weightlifters, the good ones, squat like that. They'll just try to stand up. They won't be able to stand up and they'll sit back down and bail the bar. Now, for most of us, mere mortals, that's not how we squat. Most of us will have slightly non-ideal positions, and most of us have absolutely no idea what going for a maximum will feel like. If the Road to Anywhere 2.0 squat program is an example of this. You have a 10RM, a 5RM, and a 1RM at the end of it. The 10RM comes first, about 4 weeks in. The 5RM is around 8 weeks in, and the 1RM is like 12 at the 12-week mark. The amount of times we will see people going, and it's not like you don't know what your 10RM is roughly going to be. You've done sets of 10 and 8 for the last 8 sessions in a row. You have a very, very good idea what your 10RM will be, or you'll be within 5 or 10 kilos of it when you try it. This is something you just have to learn and have to get used to. People talk about good athletes coming back from injury and they'll say, oh, they've muscle memory, or oh, they've already had that gene transcription and they're just kind of retraining. That's certainly true, but the psychological and neurological element of it, knowing that you're just going to be able to do another squat if you drop down into the bottom and just force yourself to do it, is so, so valuable. So at the risk of sounding overly motivational or any of that crap, you just have to do it. You really do just have to do it. You'll know what the rough number is. You're not an idiot. You'll know where you're at with your training. You'll have a feeling for it. Maybe it's 10 kilos heavier than the set of 8 or 10 you've done the week before. Maybe it's 20, maybe it's 30, maybe it's 40 kilos, whatever it is. You just have to trust that you've made the right decision and you have to go for it. Okay, on the same vein of the 5RM, says, good stuff. This is Wookie Roarer, says, good stuff, but I don't get it. A 5RM, I think I recall you doing 200 or 200 plus. So is this a 5RM at current body weight? To be honest, it's a 5RM in just the current training cycle. I've done 200 for 6 reps. I think I've done 210 for 4 reps. So it certainly isn't a 5RM or anything along those lines. It's a 5RM for the current training cycle. Videos tend to do better when you have 5RM in the title. So that's the completely honest answer. That's what it was as a 5RM. Grangerous asks, I noticed that your right heel picks off the ground. Just wanted to mention in case this was part of an unknown issue. Love your vlogs, by the way. So this is during the squat. On some of the squats, particularly at lighter weights, I might have a heel coming up off the ground. It might be non-ideal technique. It might be slightly shallow or something along those lines. Many of those errors, to be perfectly honest, are just concentration errors. It might be 100 kilos, it might be 140. I'm not quite sure what weight this was. But in many cases like this, it's a kind of warming up and getting into it. We want every rep to be absolutely perfect. If you're an athlete of ours, we demand that every rep be absolutely perfect. But sometimes as we're warming up, things like this happen. So I do have a restriction in my right ankle. I've done full tear on lateral ligaments on my right and left ankle and medial ligaments on my right ankle. But this was years ago. Mostly those injuries have fully cleared themselves up. And I have a slight deviation in dorsiflexion from left leg to right leg. One knee goes slightly further than the other. Now, in this case, these kind of errors just hop up every so often. And they're not really something we're overly concerned about or I'm overly concerned about in my training. In a case like this though, if I started seeing certain things, then that kind of red light starts flashing in my head. And an example of this would be if my right heel was coming off the floor every time I was squatting and it was causing that kind of torso rotation, or maybe I'd see some hip shift from right leg to left leg, or maybe I'd see that upper back accommodating. In any of those cases, then that kind of puts off the red flag in my head. But in cases like this, as we're warming up or as you might be a bit fatigued, I'm not overly bothered about it. If it's not affecting the overall mechanics of the squat, it's all okay. David O'Neill asks, bit worried about the puppy behind you if you have to dump the bar. So definitely, that dog is a young dog. He's just a year old. We adopted him like 6 months ago or 5 months ago now. So he's a bit dumb. He comes a bit close to me when I'm squatting. In all of these videos though, there is absolutely no risk of me missing a squat, having to dump the bar, not being able to control that situation. In the crazy case where something might happen, maybe on one of the 10RM or 5RM sets, in that case, I just sit fully down into the bottom of a squat, make sure that dog is nowhere near me, and then just be able to dump the bar just over my back or just back behind, and there's no real risk there. Now, if it was somebody else training, and I wasn't quite sure of how that person was, I wasn't quite sure of how comfortable they were with the weights or with the squats they were doing, the dog would obviously be nowhere near that. You'll see in many of the training vlogs, the dog is tied on one of the ropes and he can kind of amble around the gym on its own. But in this case, when I'm in control of things, it's just me training. I'm happy enough for him to ramble around and kind of tip away at his own thing. Keeps him happy, keeps him entertained. But you're definitely right. If this was somebody who wasn't 100% sure of their ability with the squat, or I wasn't 100% sure of it, that dog should be nowhere near it because he's just not accustomed to it quite so much. Many of you will remember Seiko from the other vlogs, our black Labrador. When she's in the gym, she's absolutely nowhere near the barbell because she spent many, many years of her life in the shed with bars being dropped. So she really doesn't like it. She doesn't like the loud noise. That's why she doesn't come to the gym with me. So that's the kind of learning that just takes a small bit of time to kind of kick into a dog's head. I'm not the sloth king, but this guy asked the question, would it be better if you played rugby so it was just running? So it was not shit, just running. I joined the local rugby team again, 33-year-old scaffolder. It's a bit of hassle sometimes, but it's more fun than just running. I want nothing more in life than to go back playing rugby. That is, if a genie popped out of a bottle right here, I would not own a Lamborghini. I would not be a billionaire. I would be back playing J1 rugby with Crosshaven. That's all I want in my life. But currently, unless you can give me a new brain that doesn't get concussed when people sneeze on me, that is not an option. So I played rugby for 15 years, was forced to retire due to a massive amount of head injuries that were very negatively affecting me and continued to affect me for around 2 years after I stopped playing, or even 3 years. So it's definitely something I had to work through a lot. But unfortunately, return to rugby is not something that's on the agenda for me right now, unless they can come up with something that stops my brain being so utterly fickle. Mr. Spiceaboo. Lads, what is up with these usernames? Dara, you get sick more than anyone I've seen in recent memory, lol. I 100% agree with you. I have gotten sick in the 12 months from January 2023 to December 2023 more than I think I've ever heard of anybody else getting sick in my entire life. Now, this actually was down to mishandling of some stuff by some medical people. I actually had Lyme's disease 2 or 3 years ago that they didn't diagnose, or they got the test results back and I never got those test results. So that Lyme's disease was kind of hanging around there for a while. Then I got my first staph infection December 2022, and then I had staph 6 times last year. I was about to call it red velvet cake disorder. I had scarlet fever last year. I put a knife into my leg, which meant I had to be on a very long dose of antibiotics because it was a dirty knife that had deer blood on it. And I just got sick a lot last year. Now, since starting working with Alex 2.5 or 3 months ago, that's massively improved. One of the things we're really working on is my immune system, and I'm just being much more careful. But yeah, to be honest, that sickness was down to my immune system already being goosed, and then me getting multiple flesh-eating diseases. So yeah, I definitely do get sick a lot. If you had said that to me 2 years ago, I would have slapped you in the face because I never got sick. And now you just went through a terrible 13 or 14 month run of it. But touch wood. 647-83399 says, love this. Could you do a video going more in depth on your current lifting and running plan? Be interested to know what the details are like, what pace you were doing today's your runs at. Okay, so I'm not sure what video this was from because I just have a screenshot from it. But in terms of the pace of the runs, most of the runs, if I'm doing like a slow 5k, I'll just do like 5.5 minute kilometers or 6 minute kilometers. That's roughly what I'm looking at for the pace. So 25 to 30 minute 5Ks, slow, get through it, get some mileage in. Now, in terms of the current plan, I'm just pulling it up here. What the current plan looks like is I'm running 4 times per week. 2 of those are slightly longer, one of them is slightly shorter and faster, and then one of them is an interval session. So the interval sessions at the moment are all kind of 1k intervals or slightly longer intervals. It's just getting down that pace slightly, so getting down more around that 4 minute kilometer pace. Obviously that needs to be a 3 minute kilometer pace for the 5 minute mile, but just getting those kilometer times down lower and lower and lower, and then just getting that volume in over the course of the week. Now, the squats at the moment, very simple. It's 2 squat sessions per week. To be honest, most of the time that's 2 squat sessions every 8 days though, so it's slightly staggered. It's the exact squat program that the RTA 2.0 is. Now, my starting 1RM as I got into this was around 160 kilos. That was the starting 1RM, a 1RM that I could have done on that day that I started the training block. I'm obviously not using a historic 1RM or anything along those lines, so it's the squat I could have done that day. So you'll see all of the squat sessions except the tests here were pretty easy and pretty light squat sessions. I'm not testing my 1RM at the end of this. I'm not going to go for an all-out max. I'm just going to go straight back into the volume after around week 10 session 2 or week 11 session 1 of the block. So that's what it is. It's the RTA 2.0 ran as per on the app. But that's it. Next time I run it, I'm going to probably use a starting 1RM of 205 as my 1RM number to input into the program. In terms of the squat sessions, I do 1 squat session usually on a Tuesday or Thursday morning, and I do 1 squat session at the weekend. Something that did pop up a number of times in your questions and comments was that there tends to be a gap between, or like a 20 kilo jump from vlog to vlog. We'll talk about that in a second. Christopher asks along the same lines, how many times a week do you do weightlifting training, if I may humbly ask? So at the moment, I do 0 weightlifting. No snatches, no clean and jerk, nothing, just squats, running, and then rehab work. So you would have seen in last week's training vlog some rehab work. I was obviously doing some work on my arms and shoulders because my hands go dead when I go to sleep. But the main rehab work I do at the moment is on my hips. So I'm just trying to increase that absolute extension of my hips, and then general rehab, some muscle work on my ankles, some muscle work on my calves. And then my VMOs get pretty fatigued, so just rubbing through those with a barbell, that's generally what I do. But 0 weightlifting at the moment, no snatches, no clean and jerks, and we'll see in August when weightlifting comes back what the plan will be. Okay, so Danoned Je says, notification gang, let's go. By the way, can we expect a video about BJJ competitions? So most of my training vlogs, you'll see me going to BJJ training in the morning. Sometimes there's some rolling in there. Most of the time there's not rolling in there. And to be honest, that is slightly by design. BJJ for me is very much a kind of personal thing. Obviously, there's a lot of jiu-jitsu guys love doing it, but I'm a blue belt in jiu-jitsu. I am not somebody who's going to teach you anything valuable about jiu-jitsu. So if you're watching the channel, you're watching it for strength, conditioning, power, speed, all of that kind of stuff, and the general sports and athletic development stuff. But we're not going to be the ones to teach you certain moves in jiu-jitsu or kind of preach about our style of jiu-jitsu or anything like that. That's what our coaches are there for. So we'll vlog stuff when we go to competitions, particularly if me and Garth are both competing. It's go crack to vlog it. It's good. It's nice for us to have it on record as well. But generally speaking, the kind of jiu-jitsu stuff stays over there. We're very much the students. The guys are very much the master. Galera is very much the main man. And that's how it will always stay. And we're not really going to be passing on any knowledge about jiu-jitsu. Obviously, all the stuff about strength and conditioning, athletic development for that, all of it. We do loads of videos on that for jiu-jitsu, for grappling, for judo, for wrestling, whatever it is. But in terms of the actual intricacies of the movement itself, or the skill itself, that's not our realm. We're here for athletic development, bigger, stronger, faster, more explosive. JI89 says, how tall are you, Fitz? I'm like 6'1" and a bit. That's it. I think it's 187 centimeters. We don't really use centimeters here. We use centimeters for everything else except height. Okay, so this is the question I was talking about earlier. Andrew Ferris says, did you jump from 100 kilos to 140, or were there some sessions in between this? There's sessions in between. So usually you see a training vlog from me kind of once every week or 10 days. There's training sessions going on all the time in between. People are asking about the longer runs, if any of those are videoed, or if any of the other running sessions are videoed, or what the other squat sessions are. You just can't video every training session. And what I try to do is just bring you along on the bigger training days, or if there's a couple of training sessions I can knit together just to give a bit more value, a bit more content into those sessions. It's incredibly boring just to watch a time lapse of somebody running a 5k, whereas if you can do some squats and maybe some intervals, or some squats and a longer run and talk about that, just makes for it being a small bit more entertaining. So there are training sessions in between, as I said earlier, around 4 runs per week and 2 squat sessions per week, and that's why it is. That's why you see some of those larger jumps in between. Okay, Jordy 123100, this is a massive thank you to you. So you said great training and running shoes would be Brooks Ghost Max. So I actually got the Brooks Ghost. Thank you so much. There was around 20 or 30 comments for the different running shoes recommendations. Massive thank you to everybody who submitted those. It was the same when I asked for recommendations around blisters and socks and which ones to get. I ended up getting, I think they're called 1,000 mile 2 skin socks or double skin socks or something. All this stuff is made massively easier by your help and your recommendations and your comments. So a huge amount of thanks goes out to everybody there. I'm standing on the shoulders of all of your experience. So thank you very, very much for that. It's not a question, but thank you for it. This comment is from Budget Lifter, and to be honest, it had to be left in here. It was old Oregon plays Dracula theme, dust cobwebs off old barbell, removes litter, no squat stand, as Addy stairs are falling apart on his feet. Yeah, it's lifting time. I need to get that engraved on the wall of my shed. Okay, Charles Burden says, nice. Would you recommend the Steinborn squat as an acceptable alternative for the no stand situation, specifically for somebody, me in brackets, who has no real experience with the basic power clean? No. The Steinborn squat, so unless I'm massively mistaken, the Steinborn squat, standing the barbell up on edge with the plates already loaded, then you kind of sit down into the bottom of a squat, you angle into it, and then you drop down into it. I would stay as far away from that kind of crack as humanly possible. In terms of squat stands, so the cheapest squat stands you can get at the moment are around 70 to 80 euro, getting them direct from China. They're the squat stands that me, Gerf and Clarence all use, just those basic H stands on their own. Now, that's obviously still a lot of money depending on your situation, but there is so many other things you can do for squat stands. And the next comment on from here is a guy using his dip station as a bar rack. He just has to start in the bottom of a squat. And that would be my first kind of go-to thing. If you can't get scaffolders trestles, or if you can't get a box on each side, if you can't get a 50-litre oil drum on each side that you can put the barbell down on, if that level of infrastructure is just too difficult to maybe fit in your space, or maybe too expensive to acquire, then I would bring the barbell up to a height where you're in the bottom of a squat and go from there. Stay away from any of the rotational stuff. Stay away from the Steinborn squat. To be honest, I know you say you've no experience with the power cleans, but even just a small bit of work on power cleans, you'll still get up to bodyweight power cleans very, very quickly, and then you can still acquire a lot of squat volume using those. So I would stay away rather than acquiring the skill of the Steinborn squat. I'd stay away from that. I kind of leave that in the past, although it is cool to look at, and get some sort of infrastructure set up for yourself. Oil barrels, wheelie bins where you replace the lid of the wheelie bin with something a bit more solid like 3/4 inch or 1 inch ply. All of that stuff works really well. There's videos online of guys getting the big contractors buckets, filling them with cement and putting a 4x4 post in there, and then just jimmy rigging a J hook for the 4x4 post. All of that stuff works really well. You're not going to be able to slam a barbell into it. You're not going to be able to fall forward with a barbell into it. But you can certainly, if you're careful and if you take your time, you can use them really effectively. So Danster says, I don't have a rack and I use the dip station as a rack. Dip station bar as a rack. Just have to start from the bottom position every time. This is why your comment is here, Dan. This sort of stuff is perfect. You make it work with what you have. You can get a massive amount of training done. One of the summers I worked abroad, I did a summer season in France, and I had gymnastics rings, which were 25 euro. I had a barbell, 2 20-kilo plates, and then I used to be able to slot their gas bottles over there, have a twist on top with the kind of loop in it. Used to be able to slot 2 gas bottles on each side and get some squats done. Also handstands against the wall, lots of running work, lots of hill sprints and sand dune work. All of this stuff made for a very, very good kind of off-season training block. By the time I got home, I was in great shape, probably some of the best shape I've ever gone into pre-season training with. So you don't need a lot of stuff, particularly if you're already in the really great case where you have a barbell and some plates. You can get so much valuable training done. Guy McDudester, the coolest username ever, says, how are you scaling your weekly mileage as you return to running? So this is an interesting one, right? When we look at classic periodization, we start with incredibly high volume and we end with low volume. We start with low intensity, end with high intensity. Now, when you're shy to running and you're in terrible shape, you actually have to start with low volume and low intensity, and you slowly bring the volume up, and then you can taper the volume back down. So where I started my running was, it started with very slow 3K runs. Then those 3K runs went from 1 or 2 3K runs a week to up to like 3 or 4 3K runs a week. Then I bring in a 5K, then obviously incredibly slow 5K. Then I slowly start bringing one of the paces of those 3K runs up, and keep the other 2 or 3 3Ks and the 5K quite low. And then slowly you start to eke those intensities up and eke those paces up. I did that for around 2 months, 2.5 or 3 months actually, and then started bringing in some interval training sessions. The reason I didn't bring in intervals from the start is my structures, like my ankles and my knees, just would not have been able for it. And it just wouldn't have done me any good to be trying to run those fast paces without any kind of base there at all. Okay, Cheeks7050 says, proper way to cool down and then stop exercising. And then leading to stop exercising and your body will take care of the rest. Lol. So that is true. In many of my vlogs, you'll just see me stop, hop in the car and go home, or change my shoes and go home. That is true, but there's more to it than that. So in this case, look, I've been training for a long time. I have a fairly good understanding of when I need to give myself a little bit more time or a little bit more recovery. Maybe I need to slow the pace down for quite a bit. On many of my running sessions, I'll do a really slow 1K at like barely jogging pace after I finish the run. I'll just do it purely just to kind of bring my heart rate down nice and slowly. My heart rate after some of the long runs is down to like 44, 45 beats per minute. And I like it to get down there as quickly as I possibly can. So it is, you'll see me not cooling down very often, particularly after squat sessions. Like, there's not much I'm going to do after a squat session that's going to massively aid my recovery. Like, the best thing I could do is hydrate, eat some food, and get some good sleep in. But in terms of the kind of bring your heart rate down slowly, in terms of getting out of that kind of massively intensive training mode, I do like a short, slow run just to bring my heart rate down, get my breathing back, kind of chill out a small bit. Also allows you to go back into the car or go back in home in a much, much clearer headspace, rather than kind of dumping that back all into the house when I arrive back home. So it does just bring the kind of psychological intensity down slightly as well. Kyle Cook says, less warm up next time. This is obviously a joke. This is obviously a bit tongue in cheek. I don't warm up for squats. I do warm up a small bit for running because I need to. And the reason I don't warm up for squats is just because I don't need to. There was many, many years there where I would have had to spend 25 or 30 minutes just mobilizing to get a full depth squat. Now, some people will talk smack on the depth of my squats, but that's for another day. I just don't. There's no stretching I need to do. All I have to do to get ready for squats is just prepare my body. So bring my core body temperature up, get my heart rate up, make sure there's enough synovial fluid around my joints and my joints are amply able to move. But besides that, the resting range of motion that I have around those joints is perfectly ample for a squat. So usually I'll just get the barbell on the rack. I'll do a few sets, like 2 or 3 sets of 20 kilos, usually sets of 5. Or if I'm doing higher rep sets, I'll emulate the same amount of reps that I'm going to be doing for the top sets. And then I'll just build up from there. I also do not like people taking a massive amount of jumps, like doing like 5% jumps on their way up for the squats. Most of the time you'll see me training, it's 25 kilo, 25 kilo, 20 kilo, 10 kilo, whatever it is. And those jumps are quite short. I'll try and make those jumps I try to do as few jumps as possible, basically. Obviously, I'm not going to go straight from 100 kilos to 200 kilos. But certainly when I'm going up for that 500-pound squat, it will be 70 kilos, then 120, then 170, then 200, then 215, and then 230. And that will be it. There won't be more jumps than that. At least there shouldn't be, if things are going well. Okay, Andre says, the good old-fashioned bullying comment made me chuckle a bit. I've been active since I was young, but for a while I had a new job involving a lot of overseas travel and got a bit overweight. No excuses. I was enjoying eating and partying on expenses. So my friends started greeting me with fatty, hello fatty, in the voice of Papa Lazarou from the League of Gentlemen. To this day, if I ever overdo the shandies a bit, I still hear that and make sure I even out. So this is a bit of a point of contention, to be honest. Obviously, we don't want anyone to be getting picked on or bullied. But like I said earlier, the only reason I did a half marathon on Monday night at 11 p.m. was because I was talking smack in the group chat and then the lads started bullying me. as long as everyone's on board and as long as it's kind of equally spread out among you, I think a bit of pressure and a bit of jostling there is absolutely no bad thing at all. Certainly with the staying in shape thing, it can be quite difficult. A lot of the time you might slip and your physique might be going a small bit, and maybe you're kind of getting into those unhealthy zones. You don't quite notice it until somebody close to you says it. Obviously, if it's everyone ganging up on someone, that's not right. Or if it's somebody who really doesn't want those kind of comments being made, that's not right. But with your friends or with your family, you know full well if they're going to be able to take it or not. And certainly around here, there's plenty of good old-fashioned bullying going on. Okay, Hayes says, I'm not sure if it's the angle, but it seems like your bar path does a slight curve on the concentric. Is this a standard feature of your squat? And if you could change it, would you? Yes, so very, very well observed. It's something I spoke about in some of the earlier vlogs, and the way of watching this is watch my head in relation to one of the squat rack uprights, and as I sit down into the bottom position, my head tends to come forward slightly. So a major aspect of my squat I try and work on as much as I can is being as upright with my torso as possible. I have very long femurs, I have a very short back, and this leads to my ass having to kind of go around that big range of motion, which leads to a forward inclination of my torso. So to counteract that, I force my knees forward all the way through the squat, and I try to keep forcing them forward for as long as I'm in the concentric phase of movement. Now, what happens during that concentric phase is I push my knees forward, they continue to move forward, and usually they stop with around 5% of that total depth left. And then I get this kind of forward leaning that happens as my hips continue to move down and my knees are no longer moving forward. You ask if it was something you could change, would you? I would change that in the morning. That would probably be the first thing about my squat I would change. I would want more forward knee travel. That forward knee travel to continue the entire way through the downward descent of my squat. And that would fix that problem then. Now, you'll see on the upward drive, it doesn't really happen. It's not like I continue to move forward or I don't continue to move back as I drive back up. Most of the time I stay in that forward orientation. I have the weight slightly further forward in my foot and it doesn't really affect me. But I would like to fix it if it was something I could do. At the moment, with the amount of running volume that's going through my ankles, there is 0 out of 000 possibility of that ever improving my dorsiflexion in my ankles. So that's a problem for later on. I won't worry about that overly, but very well spotted. And it is something I'd love to fix if I possibly could. Okay, Hayes then asks, I'm considering to attempt the 5-minute and 500 pound challenge. If you're quite a bit overweight to hit the goal of a fast running time, such as a 5-minute mile, and your squat is pretty close to 500, what sequence of training cycle would you recommend? Exceeding 500 pound squat while maintaining the weight, then cutting down and training for the run. I'm considering when to cut and which training cycle I should go when in relation to weight decrease. In my opinion, the number one thing you should be doing is losing that weight and getting that run as fast as possible. I'd forget completely about the squat. If your squat became 140 kilos for a year or two while you were doing that, that really doesn't matter. The squat's so much easier to get up to if you've already squatted that weight. Now, this is a caveat I give everyone who says this. Before I ever attempted this challenge, I'd squatted 230 kilos a handful of times in a handful of different training cycles, and I had run sub 5-minute miles multiple times, sub 20-minute 5Ks multiple times. Obviously there were a number of years earlier. When I first started doing it, it would probably have been 7 years previous, but retraining to get back to those numbers is a very, very different thing than training to get those numbers first day. So the number one thing you need to do is just lose as much weight as you possibly can to get those running times down and do as much running as possible to get down to those numbers, and then worry about the squat when the time comes. So that is, you'll see that's what I'm doing in my training now. That's what I should have done last time. Last time I did this, I was around 97 or 98 kilos. The time before that, I was around 99 or 100 kilos. This time, I'll be around 93 kilos doing it. Being lighter is incredibly important for this challenge. Every time I've done this, the squat's been incredibly easy. I could have done probably 10 kilos more onto the squat both times. The squat is not the problem for me here. So I'm taking a noticeable drop. The squat will be much more difficult this time. Hopefully I'll be down at that body weight, but it's the run here is the difficult thing for me to do. So I would lose the weight as quickly as possible, just get down however many kilos that is to go, and to get your running as fast as possible, get a nice solid sub 5 minute mile, and then go back to squatting afterwards. When would you recommend starting to film your lifts? Standard strength lifts, not Olympic. I'm tempted to do it, but I don't seem to feel form breakdown that would benefit from diagnosis. In addition, I'm hesitant to be annoying in the gym. So my number one thing is start recording lifts immediately. If you can record your lifts the first day you ever go to the gym, 100% do it. I have videos back from when I'm 14 or 15. I love looking back at those from prosperity's sake, but also in terms of your immediate kind of outcomes from the gym. Just watching yourself training as you're sitting on the toilet after training is so valuable. And it might not necessarily be a thing where you're going to be able to diagnose the issues, but certainly you can start seeing things if you see other people talking about their training and maybe their mechanical breakdowns are happening, or they're talking about non-ideal movement patterns, and then suddenly you can look at your video and say, okay, this guy's knees are coming in, my knees are actually coming in, or my knees aren't coming in, I do or I don't have to fix that. So start recording your lifts as soon as possible. It's always great. More data is more better. Paul Soanes says, what kind of dog is Murphy? Murphy is a Hungarian Vizsla, but he is in fact a Velociraptor. Okay, thanks very much for watching. In the comments of this video, if you've more questions, pop them down there. Thank you so much for watching. If you want some of the training programs I talked about, or you just want to take a look at the training programs we talked about today, you can look at them all for free. You can get a free trial on the Sika Strength app. There's details down below. You don't need to sign up. You don't need to pay for a subscription or anything like that. You just set up your account. You can do a free trial for a week. You can download the programs, have a look at them, and go from there. Thanks very much for watching. If you'd like to come and train with us in person, we have training camps coming up for S&C athletes and for weightlifters at the end of May in Portugal. More details are available below and on the screen now. Send us an email, sikastrength@gmail.com.